My husband told me that missing his tea time was a fate worse than death. He told me that my health was a distraction from his earned leisure. So when he started slurring his words and drooping on the left side of his face, I didn't call 911. I respected his wishes. I called him an Uber Black. Destination? The first tee at the country club. Because if he wanted to play through the pain, who was I to stop him? If you want to see how a $50 Uber ride became the most expensive trip of his life, hit that subscribe button. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And tell me, have you ever given someone exactly what they asked for and watched it destroy them? Now, let me back up to the day my marriage officially died. It wasn't with a bang, but with a whimper of an engine speeding away from the emergency room curb. It started 3 months ago on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting at the kitchen island, clutching my chest. It felt like an elephant was sitting on my ribcage, pressing down with all its weight. My left arm was numb, tingling all the way down to my fingertips. I'm 66 years old, and I know what a heart attack feels like. "Gerald?" I managed to gasp out. My husband of 40 years was standing by the espresso machine. He was polishing his favorite 9-iron with a microfiber cloth, inspecting it like it was made of gold. He didn't even look up. "Not now, Beatrice," he snapped. "It's the club championship today. I have an 8:14 tea time." "Gerald, please," I whispered, the room starting to spin around me. "I think I need to go to the hospital." He finally looked at me, but there was no concern in his eyes, only irritation. The same look he gave me when the dry cleaner didn't starch his collars right. "For God's sake, Beatrice," he groaned, checking his Rolex. "You were fine 10 minutes ago." "Is this because I didn't compliment your pot roast last night?" "It's always something with you. A headache, a backache, a heartache. You just can't stand it when the attention isn't on you for 5 minutes." A memory flashed through my mind, then sharp and unwelcome. Gerald, 30 years younger, standing in our tiny first apartment. He was holding a bouquet of daisies she'd picked from the neighbor's yard. "Bea, I don't deserve you," he'd said, his eyes bright with sincerity. "You work so hard for us. I promise I'll make it up to you someday. When I'm successful, you'll never have to worry again." I had believed him. I had believed every word. I tried to stand up, but my knees buckled beneath me. I grabbed the counter for support, knocking over a crystal vase. The crash was loud, glass shattering across the marble floor. That finally got his full attention. "Great," he yelled, throwing his hands up in disgust. "Now I have to deal with this mess before I leave? Do you have any idea what kind of mental focus golf requires?" He didn't help me up. He stepped over me to check if the water had splashed on his white golf shoes. "Get in the car," he barked, satisfied his shoes were dry. "I'll drop you off on the way. But if I miss my tea time, Beatrice, you are going to pay for it." The drive to the hospital was a blur of pain and cruelty. I was curled up in the passenger seat of his Mercedes, struggling to breathe through the pressure in my chest. Gerald was weaving through traffic, honking at anyone who dared drive the speed limit. "Unbelievable," he muttered, gripping the leather steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. "Simmons has been practicing his putting all week. I need to be there early for warm-ups. If I show up cold because my wife decided to have a panic attack, I'll be the laughingstock of the club." "Gerald," I whimpered, clutching my chest. "It hurts. It really hurts." "Stop whining," he shot back without looking at me. "You're hysterical. You're always hysterical. You know what your problem is, Beatrice? You've never understood sacrifice. I worked 60-hour weeks for 40 years. I earned my retirement. I earned my golf. And what did you do? You stayed home. You had it easy. So don't you dare act like your little chest pain is more important than my life's work." Each word hit me harder than the pain in my heart. 40 years of marriage, and this is what I was worth to him. Less than a tea time. Less than a trophy. He didn't pull into the ambulance bay. He didn't park the car to help me inside. He pulled up to the curb at the patient drop-off zone, keeping the engine running. "Get out," he said flatly, unlocking the doors with a click. "I can't walk," I whispered. "Gerald, please. I can't feel my legs." "Beatrice, move," he shouted, his face turning an ugly shade of purple. "I have 4 minutes to get across town. Get out of the car right now." I forced myself to open the door with trembling hands. I stumbled out onto the concrete, my legs shaking like leaves in a storm. I felt my knees on the hard pavement, the impact sending pain shooting through my body. A nurse was already running toward me from the sliding glass doors. I looked back at the car. Gerald wasn't looking at me. He was checking his hair in the rearview mirror, adjusting a strand that had fallen out of place. "Call Samantha when you're done," he yelled through the open window. "I'm turning my phone off." No distractions on the course. And then he punched the gas. I watched the silver Mercedes peel away, tires squealing as it disappeared around the corner. He didn't look back. Not once. As the darkness closed in around the edges of my vision, I realized something with perfect clarity. My heart wasn't just failing physically. It was breaking in a way that no doctor could fix. I had dedicated 40 years of my life to this man. I had typed his papers in college, staying up until 3 in the morning while he slept. I had worked double shifts as a waitress to support his first business when it was failing. I had raised his children, cleaned his home, managed his social calendar, and smiled at his clients. I had given him everything I had. And to him, I was nothing more than a traffic delay. I survived. It was a minor myocardial infarction, the doctor said. A warning shot from my body, telling me something had to change. My daughter Samantha was there when I woke up in the recovery room. She was holding my hand, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Mom," she sobbed, squeezing my fingers. "Why didn't Dad call me? Why did the nurse have to find your phone and call me?" I looked at my daughter's face, so full of worry and love. I thought about lying to protect her, the way I had protected her for her entire childhood. But I was tired of lying. "Because Dad had a tea time, sweetheart," I said, my voice raspy from the oxygen tube. Samantha's face went pale. "Where is he now?" she asked, looking around the sterile white room. "Is he in the waiting room?" "He's on the back 9 by now, imagine," I said, closing my eyes. "Probably trying to save Par." I heard Samantha's sharp intake of breath. When I opened my eyes, I saw something I had never seen before in my daughter's face. Not just sadness, rage. Gerald didn't come to pick me up the next day. He didn't call to check on me. He didn't send flowers or even a text message. Samantha drove me home in silence, her jaw tight with anger she was trying to contain. When I walked into the house, exhausted and fragile, Gerald was in the living room. He was sprawled on his leather recliner, watching the Golf Channel and sipping a scotch. He didn't get up when I came in. "You're back," he said, not taking his eyes off the screen. "How was your little emergency?" "I had a heart attack, Gerald," I said quietly, leaning against the door frame for support. "They put in a stent." He scoffed, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "A stent, that's it? My partner Bob has 3 stents. He played 18 holes the very next day. You know, you really threw off me rhythm yesterday. I double bogeyed the first hole because I was rushing. Lost $50 to Simmons. I hope you're happy with yourself." I looked at him. Really looked at him for the first time in years. I saw the selfish set of his jaw, the casual cruelty in his posture. I saw the way he didn't even glance at the bandage on my wrist from the IV. And I felt something inside me shift, like tectonic plates moving deep underground. It wasn't love turning to hate. It was something more dangerous. It was fear transforming into calculation. If I had died yesterday, Gerald wouldn't have mourned me. He would have been annoyed by the funeral arrangements interfering with his golf schedule. And then he would have spent every dime of our savings on his club fees and vacations. Money I had helped earn. money I had carefully invested over decades. He would leave nothing for Samantha, nothing for my grandchildren. He would marry that 20-year-old hostess he always flirted with at the club restaurant, and my entire life's work would vanish like morning mist. Something cold and clear settled in my chest, right next to my damaged heart. I walked past him without another word and headed toward the guest bedroom. "Where are you going?" he called after me, finally sounding annoyed enough to notice. "I'm tired, Gerald," I said, not turning around. "I'm going to rest." "Well, don't expect me to bring you dinner," he shouted. "I'm not your nurse." I closed the door softly behind me and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands were trembling, but not from weakness this time. I picked up my phone and opened my contacts. I scrolled until I found a name I hadn't called in years. A lawyer named Henderson. A shark, people called him. The kind of man who ate opponents for breakfast and billed them for the privilege. I stared at his number for a long moment. Then I put the phone down. Not yet. I needed to think. I needed to plan. And I needed to make sure that when I finally made my move, Gerald would never see it coming. The next week was a revelation. I started paying attention in ways I never had before. I watched how Gerald treated me, cataloging every slight, every cruelty, every dismissive wave of his hand. He spoke to me like I was an appliance that had started to malfunction, an inconvenience that needed to be tolerated until it could be replaced. But I also watched how he treated our granddaughter, Mia. And that's when my blood truly rankled. Mia is 19 years old, bright and beautiful, with her whole life ahead of her. She's in her first year of college, studying to be a veterinarian because she's always loved animals. But lately, she's been dating a boy named Jason. And Jason is a carbon copy of Gerald at that age. Arrogant, dismissive, and utterly convinced that the world exists to serve him. Mia came over on a Sunday afternoon to help me with the garden. Gerald, of course, refused to lift a finger for anything that didn't involve a golf club. I was trying to move a bag of mulch when Mia rushed over and took it from my hands. "Grandma, you shouldn't be lifting that," she scolded gently. "Your heart, remember?" I smiled at her concern. "I'm fine, sweetheart. The doctor said light activity is good for me." Mia nodded, but then she said something that made me freeze. "Jason says women are too weak for manual labor anyway." I set down my gardening gloves very carefully. He said, "What?" "Oh, you know how he is," Mia laughed nervously, but I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. "He just likes to take charge. He says it's cute when I try to do man's work. He prefers if I just watch him and cheer him on. It's kind of sweet, actually. He's very protective." I looked at my beautiful granddaughter and felt my heart crack open. I saw the hesitation in her eyes, the way she was already editing her own thoughts. She was shrinking herself down to fit into a small, suffocating box, just like I had done 40 years ago, just like my mother had done before me. "Mia," I said, taking her hands in mine, "come sit with me for a moment." We walked to the garden bench and sat down together. "Do you know why I have this house?" I asked her. "This garden? The investments that pay for your college?" "Because Grandpa worked hard?" she offered, sounding unsure. "No," I said firmly. "Because when your grandfather started his first company, I sold my jewelry. The pearls my mother left me, my engagement ring, everything. I worked double shifts at a diner for 3 years while he got the business off the ground. I did all the accounting for free for the first decade. I made every sacrifice. I built the foundation this family stands on with my own 2 hands." Mia's eyes widened. "But Grandpa always says he did it all himself." "He says that now," I agreed. "And somewhere along the way, I let him." I stopped saying, "I did this," and started saying, "he did this." I handed over credit for my own work because I thought that's what a good wife did. And the moment I stopped claiming my power, he started treating me like furniture. Like something that was just there, barely worth noticing. Mia looked toward the main house, where we could hear Gerald shouting at the television. Something about a missed putt. I don't want to end up like that, she whispered. Then don't, I said, squeezing her hands. And neither will I. Not anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the guest bedroom, staring at the ceiling, thinking about my mother. She had been a traditional woman, raised in a time when wives were expected to be silent partners. A woman's job is to make her husband look good, she used to say. Your happiness comes from his success. She had lived by those words her entire life. And she had died alone, in a hospital bed, while my father was at a business dinner. He hadn't even called to check on her. By the time he arrived, she was already gone. I remember standing at her funeral, watching my father shake hands with colleagues, playing the role of grieving widower. I had sworn then that I would be different, that my marriage would be different. But here I was, 40 years later, in the same trap. No, not anymore. The next morning, I called Mr. Henderson. His office was in a sleek downtown high-rise, all glass and steel and intimidation. The receptionist showed me into his corner office, where Henderson sat behind a desk that probably cost more than my first car. He was a tall man in his 60s, with silver hair and eyes like a hawk. Mrs. Thorne, he said, gesturing for him to sit. I was surprised to get your call. Everyone in this town knows your husband. That's exactly why I'm here, I said, sitting down carefully. I need to know my options. Henderson leaned back in his leather chair and steepled his fingers. Let me be blunt with you, Beatrice. I've seen cases like yours 100 times. Your husband is a pillar of this community. Golf buddies with the mayor, poker night with half the judges in the county. He has assets hidden in shell companies, trust funds that are locked up tighter than Fort Knox, and a reputation he would kill to protect. I felt my stomach tighten. So what are you saying? I'm saying that if you file for divorce tomorrow, it will be a bloodbath. He will drag it out for 3, maybe 4 years. He will drain the joint accounts paying for lawyers just to spite you. He will dig up every doctor's appointment, every therapist visit, every prescription you've ever had. He will paint you as a senile, ungrateful wife having a mental breakdown. And at the end of it all, you'll be lucky to walk away with 1/4 of what you deserve. My hands were shaking in my lap, but I kept my voice steady. So what do I do? Just accept it? Roll over and let him win? Henderson smiled then, and it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just spotted easy prey. No, Mrs. Thorne, you don't fight him head on. That's what he expects. You let him defeat himself. I leaned forward. How? Your husband is a man who loves control, Henderson explained. He loves to hear himself talk. He loves to make grand declarations about his rights, his priorities, his supremacy. What you need is to get him on record. Make him declare, loudly and clearly, that his leisure is more important than his health and yours. Make him say things that any judge, any jury, any journalist would find indefensible. Give him enough rope, Beatrice, and let him hang himself. I sat with those words for a long moment. You want me to record him. I want you to let him be exactly who he is, Henderson said. Just make sure there's evidence. I went home that day with a new purpose burning in my chest. But before I could set any trap, I needed to prepare the legal groundwork. Henderson had explained medical power of attorney to me, and I realized I had leverage I'd never understood. As Gerald's wife, I was his designated proxy for medical decisions if he became incapacitated. It was a standard arrangement, one we'd set up years ago and never thought about again. But now it was going to become my shield and my sword. Henderson and I worked together to update the documents. We added a very specific clause that he called the quality of life provision. It stated that in the event of a medical emergency, Gerald's expressed verbal wishes regarding his lifestyle and personal commitments should be given priority over aggressive medical intervention that might interfere with his stated preferences. In other words, if Gerald ever said on record That he'd rather die than miss his precious golf game? The law would let me honor that wish. I signed the documents in Henderson's office. The paper was heavier than I expected, cream-colored and official. My hand trembled as I wrote my name, the pen scratching against the heavy stock. When I finished, Henderson slid the papers into a folder. "Perfect," he said. "Now we just need him to sign his copy." "He won't read it," I said. "He never reads anything I put in front of him. He'll just ask where to sign and complain that I'm wasting his time." "Even better," Henderson said. I was right. Gerald signed the updated medical power of attorney that evening without looking at a single word. "What is this? More of your paranoid nonsense?" he grumbled, scrawling his signature. "Just updated healthcare documents," I said sweetly. "The hospital recommended it after my procedure." "Fine, fine," he waved dismissively. "Can I get back to my show now?" "Of course, dear." I took the signed documents and locked them in my personal safe. The trap was set. Now I just needed the bait. 3 weeks later, I arranged a family dinner. Samantha came with the grandchildren. Gerald, as always, sat at the head of the table, holding court and bragging about his new titanium driver. I had placed my phone under my napkin, the recording app already running. I waited for a natural pause in the conversation, then spoke in my smallest, most helpless voice. "Gerald," I said, "I was looking at the calendar today." He glanced at me with barely concealed annoyance. "And?" "The regional tournament is next month, the one you've been training for. My cardiologist mentioned I might need a follow-up procedure around that time. Something about checking the stent, making sure everything is healing properly." I let my voice tremble just slightly. "I'm scared, Gerald. The thought of going back to that hospital alone? Could you maybe skip the tournament this year, just to be home with me in case something happens?" The silence that followed was deafening. Samantha looked at her father with hope in her eyes. The grandchildren stopped eating, sensing the tension. Gerald put down his fork with a deliberate clink. His face was turning that familiar shade of angry purple. "Here we go," he sneered. "The guilt trip, right on schedule." "Skip the regional? Are you completely out of your mind, woman?" "But Dad," Samantha interjected softly, "Mom's heart condition is serious. The doctor said—" "Stop coddling her!" Gerald slammed his fist on the table so hard the silverware jumped. "This is exactly what she wants. She wants to control me. She wants to keep me on a leash like a dog." He stood up, puffing out his chest like a rooster. "Listen to me, all of you, and listen good. I have worked my entire life to enjoy retirement. I earned this. Every round of golf, every trophy, every minute of peace. My life belongs to me, not to you, Beatrice, not to some doctor, not to anyone." His finger jabbed toward me with each word. "I don't care if I'm on my deathbed. I don't care if you're on your deathbed. If I have a tee time, I am playing golf. I am a man who honors his commitments to the game. So do not, ever, ask me to sit in some depressing hospital waiting room holding your hand. I would rather die on the 18th green than live one single day trapped in this house nursing you. Is that absolutely clear?" The room was frozen. Samantha had tears streaming down her face. The grandchildren looked terrified. I looked down at my lap, at the faint red light blinking beneath my napkin. "It's clear, Gerald," I said softly, keeping my voice perfectly even. "You've made your priorities very clear. So if there's ever a medical emergency, you want me to respect your wishes about the game?" "Damn right," he bellowed, spit flying from his lips. "No hospitals, no doctors interfering with my schedule. Leave me alone and let me play. That's all I ask." He sat back down heavily and picked up his fork. "Now, can we please finish dinner without any more of your theatrical performances?" That night, I sat in the guest bedroom and played back the recording. Gerald's voice filled the room, ugly and unmistakable. "I would rather die on the 18th green than live one single day trapped in this house nursing you." I played it 3 times. Then I emailed it to Henderson. The next morning, I drove back to his office. Henderson played the recording on his computer speakers, nodding slowly. "This is perfect," he said when it finished. "Legally admissible in this state. Combined with the medical power of attorney he signed, you now have documented evidence of his wishes." "What happens now?" I asked. Henderson looked at me over his glasses. "Now, Mrs. Thorne, you wait. You bed the perfect wife. You raise no suspicions. And when the moment comes, when he has a medical crisis of his own, you follow his instructions to the letter. You give him exactly what he asked for." I thought about the future stretching out before me. I thought about the years of planning that might be required. "What if it takes a long time?" I asked. "What if he stays healthy?" Henderson smiled that cold, predatory smile again. "Your husband is 68 years old, overweight, high blood pressure. He drinks scotch every night. He refuses to go to doctors. He thinks exercise is walking to his golf cart. Trust me, Mrs. Thorne, you won't have to wait long." He was right about the waiting, but wrong about how it would feel. The next 2 months were the hardest performance of my life. I played the role of the submissive, broken wife. I cooked Gerald's meals exactly how he liked them. I washed his golf shirts and pressed his pants. I smiled when his friends came over and laughed at his jokes. And I collected evidence. I documented every cruel comment, every dismissive gesture, every time he called me worthless or weak. I took photos of the wine bottles he emptied every week. I kept records of the money he spent on golf equipment while complaining about my medical bills. I built my case, brick by brick, in secret. And I spent time with Mia. Not just gardening anymore. Planning. "Grandma, why do you want to learn how to use Uber?" Mia asked one afternoon. We were sitting at her apartment, her phone between us. "I thought you said smartphones were confusing." I lied. I winked at her. "I'm not as helpless as your grandfather thinks I am. Now show me how to schedule a ride." Mia walked me through the app step by step. How to enter a destination. How to select the type of car. How to add notes for the driver. "Why Uber Black specifically?" she asked, watching me practice. "Because," I said, smoothing my skirt, "if you're going to send someone somewhere, you should do it with style. It keeps up appearances." Mia looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Grandma, is everything okay? You've been different lately." "Different how?" "I don't know," she said slowly. "Stronger, maybe, like you're planning something." I patted her hand. "I'm just learning new skills, sweetheart. It's never too late to grow." But there was something else I needed to tell her. Something I had been carrying alone for too long. "Mia, I need you to do something for him." "Anything, Grandma." "I need you to look at Jason, really look at him, and ask yourself one question. In 40 years, when you need him most, will he be there for you? Or will he be walking out the door to chase something he thinks is more important?" Mia was quiet for a long moment. "He told me last week that he doesn't want me to apply for the veterinary program in Boston. He says it's too far. He says long-distance relationships don't work. He says I should stay here and go to a local school so I can be close to him." "And what do you want?" I asked. "I want Boston," she whispered. "It's been my dream since I was 12. "Then take it," I said firmly. "Don't let anyone make you small, Mia." I spent 40 years making myself small for a man who didn't deserve it. Don't make my mistake. She looked at me with tears in her eyes, then pulled me into a hug. "I love you, Grandma." "I love you too, sweetheart. Now, show me how to save a destination as a favorite." 2 months passed. I watched. I waited. I noticed things about Gerald I had ignored for years. The way his hand sometimes trembled when he reached for his coffee cup, the occasional moments when he would pause mid-sentence, searching for a word that should have come easily, the flush in his face that came more often now, even when he wasn't angry. His body was beginning to fail him, and he was too proud to admit it. Then, one morning, everything changed. It was a Sunday, the day of the Tri-State Invitational, the biggest golf tournament of the year. Gerald had been talking about it obsessively for weeks, like a child before Christmas. He had laid out his clothes the night before, arranging them carefully on the dresser. His lucky polo shirt, his championship cap, his custom golf shoes that cost more than most people's rent. He came into the kitchen at 6:30 a.m. I was sitting at the island, drinking my tea, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Where's my—" Gerald started, then stopped abruptly. He was staring at the coffee pot with a confused expression. His mouth was moving, but no words were coming out. "Your coffee cup?" I offered helpfully, keeping my voice calm. "Yes," he snapped, looking relieved and annoyed at the same time. "Why isn't it here?" He reached for the mug with his right hand. He missed. His fingers just swiped through empty air, completely misjudging the distance. He tried again, his brow furrowing in confusion. This time his hand knocked the mug over, sending it crashing to the floor. "Gerald?" I said, setting down my tea and standing up slowly. He turned to look at me, and that's when I saw it. The right side of his face was drooping, sliding downward like melting wax. His eye was sagging. The corner of his mouth was pulled down in a grotesque half-frown. "What are you looking at?" he tried to say, but it came out as, "What are you look at?" His words were thick, slurred, as if his tongue had suddenly grown too large for his mouth. He tried to take a step toward me and stumbled, grabbing the counter to keep from falling. His right leg was dragging, barely responding to his commands. Fast. Face drooping. Arm weakness. Speech difficulty. Time to call 911. I knew exactly what was happening. A massive stroke. The kind where every single second counts. The kind where, if you get to the emergency room within 30 minutes, you might walk away with minimal damage. But if you wait too long, you're trapped in your own body forever. I walked over to him calmly. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. "Gerald," I said, looking into his spanicked, uneven eyes, "you're having a stroke." "I am not," he tried to yell, but it came out as, "I am He pushed himself off the counter, swaying dangerously. Tired, he mumbled, drool beginning to leak from the slack side of his mouth. "Just tired. Need coffee. Club. Late." He looked at the clock on the wall with his one working eye. "Going to go," he slurred. "Play. My tournament." I held up my phone. "I can call 911, Gerald. The ambulance can be here in 5 minutes. They have clot-busting medication. If we act fast, you might be okay." He swatted at my phone with his good hand, knocking it from my grip. "No," he roared, though it sounded more like a wounded animal. "No ambulance. Neighbors will see. Embarrassing. I play. My trophy. My tournament." He was choosing a golf trophy over his brain function. He was choosing his pride over his ability to walk, to speak, to feed himself. I looked at this man I had spent 40 years of my life with. I saw the husband who had left me on a hospital curb to chase his own glory. I saw the grandfather who had taught our granddaughter that her dreams didn't matter. I heard his voice echoing in my memory. "I would rather die on the 18th green than live one single day in a hospital with you." "Okay, Gerald," I said. My voice was steady as stone. "I respect your decision. You're the master of this house, right? You always said so." "Right," he grunted, leaning heavily against the kitchen island. "Ride. Need ride." "I can't drive you myself," I said. "My heart condition, remember? You told me not to stress myself with unnecessary things. But don't worry, darling. I'll handle everything." I picked up my phone from where it had fallen on the floor. I opened the Uber app. I selected Uber Black, just like Mia had taught me. Driver, Kevin, 4.9 stars. Black Suburban, 3 minutes away. Destination, Hillside Country Club. Main clubhouse. I added a note for the driver. Husband is a bit hungover and grumpy this morning. Please get him to his tea time ASAP. He can be cranky, but he tips well. Don't let him fall asleep in the car. I pressed confirm. A small chime indicated the ride was booked. Your car is coming, Gerald, I said, slipping my phone into my pocket. Go get your clubs from the garage. He nodded jerkily and stumbled toward the garage door, dragging his right leg behind him. It was painful to watch, but not as painful as dying on a hospital curb while my husband drove away to play golf. I watched from the front window as Kevin, the Uber driver, pulled up in his spotless black Suburban. He got out and walked to the garage, where Gerald was leaning against his golf bag, barely able to stand. Kevin looked concerned as he helped Gerald into the back seat. I could see him studying Gerald's drooping face, the uneven gait, the slurred mumbling. But then Kevin looked at the expensive golf bag. He looked at our beautiful house. He looked at the prestigious neighborhood. He probably decided Gerald was just another wealthy eccentric who had started celebrating his victory early. Gerald slumped against the window, his face pressed to the glass like melted clay. He raised his good hand as the car started to pull away. It might have been a wave. It might have been an attempt at an obscene gesture. It didn't matter anymore. The black Suburban disappeared around the corner. I stood there for a moment in the perfect silence of my beautiful, empty house. I didn't feel guilty. I felt something I hadn't experienced in 40 years. Peace. I went to the kitchen and made myself a fresh cup of Earl Grey. I took a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the warmth and the bergamot. Then I went upstairs to change my clothes. I needed to look the part. The worried wife. The frantic savior who had tried everything to help her stubborn husband. But not too frantic. I took my time choosing an outfit. A tasteful beige cardigan. Sensible slacks. Low heels that I could run in, but not too fast. I applied my makeup carefully in the mirror. Waterproof mascara, just in case I needed to cry on cue. A muted rose lipstick that said, concerned rather than celebratory. I looked at myself in the mirror. I practiced my worried expression. Perfect. I checked the clock. Kevin had left exactly 15 minutes ago. The drive to the country club was about 20 minutes. I needed to time this perfectly. I waited another 10 minutes. Just enough time for Gerald to arrive. Just enough time for someone at the club to notice something was very, very wrong. Then I got in my car and started driving. I obeyed every speed limit. I stopped completely at every stop sign. I let other cars merge in front of me with a patient smile. When I pulled up to the Hillside Country Club, the ambulance was already there. Red and white lights flashing against the manicured hedges, sirens winding down to silence. A crowd had gathered near the bag drop area, a cluster of men in pastel polos and expensive visors. They were whispering behind their hands, their eyes wide with shock. I parked my car in the nearest spot and walked toward the commotion. I didn't run too fast. My knees, you know. Gerald! I screamed, letting my voice crack with practiced anguish. Oh my God, Gerald! Let me through! The crowd parted like the Red Sea, and there he was. My husband, Gerald P. Thorne, the pillar of the community, the legend of the Hillside Country Club. He was lying flat on the pristine red brick of the clubhouse entryway. His expensive white golf pants were stained dark at the crotch. He had lost control of his bladder. Right there. In front of the club president. In front of his business rivals. In front of the board members he had bragged to for decades. And yes, in front of that 20-year-old hostess he liked to flirt with. She was standing near the door, her hand over her mouth, trying not to gag. Gerald was conscious, but barely. His eyes were rolling wildly, darting around in pure animal panic. He saw me approaching. He tried to speak, tried to explain, tried to accuse. But only a guttural, wet noise came out. Ga. Be. A paramedic was kneeling over him, checking his vital signs with grim efficiency. "Ma'am, are you his wife?" the paramedic asked, looking up at me. "Yes," I sobbed, dropping to my knees beside Gerald on the hard brick. I told him not to come. I begged him to let me call an ambulance. I grabbed Gerald's hand, the one that wasn't paralyzed. He woke up feeling dizzy, but he insisted on coming to his tournament. He said, "I'd rather die on the golf course than miss my tee time." Those were his exact words. The club president, Mr. Sterling, stepped closer, shaking his head sadly. "That sounds exactly like Gerald," he said, his voice heavy with what he thought was admiration. Stubborn old goat. Always said golf was life itself to him. "He pushed me away when I tried to call 911, I cried, looking up at the crowd with tears streaming down my face. "He forced me to call him a car service. He said I was overreacting." "Oh, Gerald, why didn't you listen to me? Why didn't you let me help you?" Gerald's eyes were locked on mine. There was no confusion in them anymore. Through the fog of his dying brain cells, through the chaos of neurons misfiring, he understood. He knew exactly what I had done. He knew exactly why I had done it. He tried to pull his hand away from mine, but he was too weak. His fingers twitched uselessly in my grip. I squeezed tighter. "It's okay, darling," I whispered, leaning close to his ear so only he could hear. "You made it. You didn't miss your tea time. Isn't that what mattered most?" A sound escaped from his throat. Not words. Something between a moan and a scream. The sound of a man who finally understood the cost of his choices. The paramedics loaded him onto a stretcher. The crowd watched in horrified silence as the great Gerald Thorne was carried away. Not in triumph, but in disgrace. His legacy wasn't the trophy he dreamed of winning today. His legacy was a wet stain on the brick pavement and a wife weeping over his foolishness. "We need to get him to St. Jude's immediately," the lead paramedic shouted. "Stroke protocol. We're already outside the optimal window by at least 40 minutes. "Oh no," I gasped, covering my mouth. "Is it too late? Will he be okay?" "If he had gotten to an ER an hour ago, maybe," the medic said grimly. "But at this point, the damage is done. It's going to be touch and go." I stood there as they loaded him into the ambulance. I watched the doors slam shut. I watched the vehicle pull away, sirens wailing. Mr. Sterling walked over and put a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You did everything you could, Beatrice," he said gently. Gerald was a man who lived by his own rules. "Yes," I said, dabbing at my perfectly dry eyes with a tissue. "He certainly was." Gerald survived. Unfortunately for him, the stroke destroyed the motor center of his right hemisphere. He was paralyzed on his entire left side. Arm, leg, face, everything. His speech was permanently impaired. The doctors called it global aphasia. He could understand every word spoken to him. He could think clearly, feel emotions, remember everything. But he could only produce a handful of sounds. No, g. Sometimes golf, though it came out more like gaw. He was trapped inside his own mind, a prisoner in a body that no longer obeyed him. He spent 3 weeks in the ICU, then another 2 in rehabilitation. The doctors tried their best, but there was only so much they could do. When it was time for discharge, the social worker called me for a meeting. "Mrs. Thorne," she said gently, "Gerald requires 24 hours skilled nursing care. It's too much for one person to manage at home, especially given your own heart condition." "I completely agree," I said immediately. "I couldn't possibly handle it alone." "We understand. His insurance covers several premium facilities in the area. I have a list of excellent places that specialize in stroke rehabilitation." "Actually," I interrupted, folding my hands in my lap, "Gerald and I discussed his long-term care preferences. He was very specific about what he wanted." The social worker looked surprised. "He was?" "Oh, yes. Gerald always said he didn't want to waste money on what he called fancy hotels for dying people." He was very frugal about these things. He wanted to preserve the family assets for his grandchildren. This was, of course, a complete lie. Gerald had never been frugal about anything, except when it came to spending money on me. But I had the recording. I had hours of him complaining about hospital costs, about doctors who just want your money, about ridiculous medical bills. Well, the social worker said slowly, "There is a state-subsidized facility in the next county, Sunnyvale Meadows. It's basic, but it meets all legal standards of care." Sunnyvale Meadows. The exact place Gerald had tried to force me to put my mother in 10 years ago. I remembered his words perfectly. It's good enough for someone who doesn't know what day it is. Waste of money putting her anywhere nicer. That sounds perfect, I said with a sad smile. It's exactly what Gerald would have wanted. The day I moved him in was rainy and gray. Fitting somehow. Sunnyvale Meadows smelled of boiled cabbage and industrial bleach. The floors were yellowed linoleum, peeling at the corners. The fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered overhead. Gerald's room was shared. His roommate was a man named Earl, who screamed about invisible spiders every 20 minutes or so. I wheeled Gerald into the room myself. He was strapped into his wheelchair so he wouldn't slump over onto the floor. His eyes darted around the room in absolute horror. He saw the stained ceiling tiles with their water damage. He saw the narrow, metal-framed bed with its thin mattress. He saw Earl in the corner, currently trying to eat his own sock. Then Gerald looked at me. He made a desperate, gurgling sound, his mouth working uselessly. He managed. "No, here. Home. No, here." I understood him perfectly. I parked his wheelchair next to the window. The view was a brick wall and a dumpster. I sat down on the edge of his narrow bed and smoothed the thin blanket. "Now, Gerald," I said, using my most patient, reasonable voice. "Don't be ungrateful. This is a very sensible choice. Think of all the money we're saving. Money that can go to Mia's education trust fund." His eyes widened at Mia's name. "Oh, didn't I tell you?" I smiled. "I set up an irrevocable trust for Mia yesterday, using the funds from the sale of your boat. And your golf clubs. I sold that titanium driver to Mr. Simmons. He gave me an excellent price. He said he always admired it." Gerald's face turned crimson. He tried to thrash in his chair, but the restraints held him tight. "Gah!" he screamed. "Gah! No!" "Shh," I patted his hand gently. "You don't need them anymore, dear. You're retired now. Permanently." I reached into my purse and pulled out one more item. A photograph in a simple frame. It was Mia, smiling brilliantly, holding an acceptance letter. "She got into the veterinary program in Boston," I said, showing him the picture. "The one she always dreamed about. And guess what? She broke up with Jason." Gerald blinked, confused. "She told him that she comes from a long line of strong women. She said she doesn't have time for little boys who think they're kings. I've never been prouder of her." I set the photo on his nightstand where he could see it, right next to a small, cheap plastic succulent I'd picked up at the dollar store. It was dusty and fake and slightly crooked. "There," I said, adjusting it slightly. "A little touch of home. It's low maintenance, just like you always wanted me to be." I stood up and buttoned my coat. "I have to go now, Gerald. I have a lunch date with Samantha. We're trying that French bistro downtown. The one you always said was too expensive and too pretentious. Turns out it's actually quite lovely." He started to cry then. Real tears, rolling down the paralyzed side of his face. They dripped onto his hospital gown, leaving dark spots on the fabric. He was finally beginning to understand. This wasn't a temporary setback. This wasn't something he could talk or bully his way out of. This was his life now. A prison of his own design, built by his arrogance, locked by his cruelty. And I held the only key. I leaned down and pressed a kiss to his forehead. It was cool and slightly damp with sweat. Goodbye, Gerald, I whispered.
Try to enjoy the leisure. You earned every minute of it. I walked out of his room without looking back.
I walked down the hallway that smelled of despair and disinfectant. I passed the nurse's station where overworked aides barely glanced up, and when I pushed through the front doors and stepped out into the rain, the air had never tasted so sweet. I got into my car and sat for a moment, letting the rain stream down the windshield. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. I didn't see a victim anymore. I didn't see a broken, discarded wife. I saw a woman who had finally cleared the course. On her own terms. I pulled out my phone and called Mia. "Hi, Grandma." Her voice was bright and full of life. "Did you get Grandpa settled?" "Yes, sweetheart," I said, starting the engine. "He's exactly where he belongs." "Are you still coming to lunch?" "Mom's already at the restaurant." "I'm on my way." "And Mia?" "Yeah?" "You drive today. I think I'm done with being a passenger." We met at the French bistro. The hostess seated us on the terrace, where the rain had stopped and afternoon sun was breaking through the clouds. Samantha looked at me with concern. "Mom, are you okay? This must have been so hard for you." "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, opening the menu. "Better than I've been in 40 years. Mia grinned at me from across the table. "Grandma, you seem different. What happened?" I looked at my daughter and my granddaughter, the two women who had given meth courage to finally fight back. "I just realized something," I said. "Life is too short to be a passenger in your own story." The waiter approached our table. "Good afternoon, ladies. May I start you with something to drink?" I smiled up at him. "Yes, your finest champagne, please." 3 glasses. "Celebrating something special?" he asked. I looked at my daughter and granddaughter, at their beautiful, strong faces. I thought about the man in the nursing home, staring at a brick wall. I thought about the 40 years I had wasted being small. I thought about all the years ahead of me, finally free. "Yes," I said, "a new beginning." The champagne arrived, golden and bubbling. I raised my glass. "To strong women," I said. "May we know them. May we raise them. May we be them." We clinked our glasses together. The sound rang out across the terrace, clear and bright. I took a sip and closed my eyes. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. So that's how I sent my husband to a golf course during his stroke and a nursing home to live out his days. Some people might call it cruel. I call it poetic justice. He wanted to prioritize his game over, my life. I simply let him play through. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever been in a situation where someone valued their hobbies or ego more than your well-being? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. I'll be reading every comment while I enjoy another glass of champagne. Cheers!